How's it going, YouTube? Biker Mike here with another how-to video. This video is going to be on checking the valve clearance on a 2009 Yamaha Kodiak, or if you're in the US, the Grizzly 450. I'm going to go over some basic reasons why you're doing this, and also things to look for and other problems that could be underlying if your valve clearance is too tight or if there's no clearance at all. I'll go over that later on in the video and show you guys some important things to know about doing this as to why you're actually doing it too. Alright, so we'll get started right away by removing the seat. Okay, once you get the seat off, you'll notice there's some specifications listed on the airbox cover, and it gives you both the intake and the exhaust specifications right there. So we're going to be measuring that with some feeler gauges later on, but just so you know where to find the specs on it, they conveniently listed it right on the airbox cover. Next, we're going to have to take the fuel tank off. Before we do that, we need to remove the fuel tank shutoff, and you want to make sure it's in the off position first, and then you're going to need a pretty long number 2 Phillips screwdriver, and just got to get it positioned in there. There we go. And then just back it out just like that, and it should come straight out of there with the screw still in it. Next up, we're going to remove these side panels. And the gas tank shroud. You're going to need a 4mm Allen key socket for that. Remove the gas cap. These 10mm bolts on the back of the cover. And the 2 on the side. And the cover should come straight off, just like that. Put the gas cap back on. There's 2 more bolts up here at the front. Hold the gas tank down. Then we need to disconnect the fuel line from the carburetor. Just be careful of the fuel spilling out of the line. But that's why we had the gas valve shut off before we started this. Now you can take the tank right off the quad. Remove the zip ties holding this cover on. So you can see there's quite a bit of dust and dirt buildup on this valve cover. So we need to clean this off, and what we're going to use is I'm just going to use some WD-40 and a toothbrush and just kind of get all this cleaned up and then blow it off with compressed air. Here's some brake cleaner if you got it. So I'm just going to rinse things down. So you don't want any dirt dropping down in there, and now you don't have to worry about that. Now you're ready to take this cover off. You're going to need a 6mm Allen key or Allen key socket. So now we need to make sure that the engine's set at top dead center. So in order to do that, we need to take the pull starter off. For whatever reason, this bolt seems like it's pretty tough to get out. It almost feels like it's gonna break. So what I'm gonna do is just shock the threads inside there just by hitting it with a hammer, like all the way through something solid. And give it a try again. I'm not really sure what's going on here. And frig, there you go, guys. Broken bolt. But I tried to do what I could to get that out. Just one of those things, that's the way it goes sometimes. Not sure why that happened. But when I put these other bolts back in, I'm going to be sure to put some anti-seize on them, that's for sure. Okay, so that broken bolt there kind of tells me that a valve adjustment check has never been done on this machine. So that's why I wanted to get this done. It's got 5,000 kilometers on it now. I'm not sure what they recommend. You might have to check your manual for that, for the interval specifications. But you need to remove this plug, and then that'll expose the timing marks to make sure you're at top dead center. Okay guys, I just had an idea. If you run into the problem that these small little bolts are feeling like they're gonna break, what you could try doing is just putting the tip of your soldering iron or gun on the bolt head and just heat it up with some precision heat there. You probably wouldn't want to use a torch, but I've found that on smaller little fasteners like this that feel like they're stuck, you can just heat them up with a soldering iron, or like I said, your soldering gun. Something to try, and then shock it, and then see if it'll back out. But sometimes stuff happens, guys. So what you're going to need next is a 17mm socket, and I hooked it on to my breaker bar. That's what I found to work good when you're rolling a motor around. You don't really want to use the ratchet because you can't, you know, control how the motor's spinning. So a breaker bar, 17mm socket, and then you just want to put it right on that bolt, and then you can turn the motor and look in the inspection cover here to make sure your timing marks are lined up. So you can already see, maybe, I'll show you in a minute here once I get it set, but there's a little cut there in the thread, and that'll line up with probably a T mark on the flywheel inside there, and that's how you know you're at top dead center. So I'm going to go ahead and get it set, and then try to show you guys inside what it should look like. And just so you know, when you're turning the motor over, you should be turning it counterclockwise in the regular direction of travel. Okay guys, the picture I took turned out pretty good here. You can see the T mark and the little cut mark in the flywheel lining right up with the indent in the engine case there. So that's how all that should look when it's right lined up at top dead center. So now that the motor's set at top dead center, we can check the clearance between the rocker arm and the top of the valve stem. Now it's adjustable with a wrench and a little square head on the top there. It looks like a 10mm wrench, but I can already tell that the valve clearance is too tight on this. I can barely get the minimum shim under there at 0.06 millimeters, and that's the smallest the gap should be. I don't know if you can read it, but the gap should be 0.06 to 0.1 millimeters of a gap. So you'll want to keep it at the high side of the gap, and if it's too tight, or what can happen once these valves wear, like what's happening as you're running the motor, the valve, the profile on the valve and the seat are wearing, so then you start losing that gap between the top of the valve stem and your tappet right there. And then what that does is actually leaves the valve a little bit open, so it doesn't totally seal, so you actually lose some performance. And when it gets really bad, I'll show you what can happen when your valves are really wore. We'll go over here to the whiteboard, and I sort of drew up this little cross section of the inside of the engine. You can see this is the combustion chamber here, and we got the piston, and we'll make this the intake valve. Now what I was talking about, when it's pushed down too far, when there's no clearance in between the top of the valve stem and your rocker up here, what can happen is it leaves the valve open, and then you get some seepage back up in there when the piston's coming back up. So not only that, if the clearance is really bad and really tight, what can happen is the profile on the valve wears so bad, and the seat, I couldn't really draw this cross section of the seat, but you can kind of get the idea. Both the surfaces of the seat and the valve can wear really bad, and then you can never get a seal back in there, and then it's time to put new valves in and have the seats recut, or in the case of my 06 450, you can have new seats put in. Now I'm going to show you what happened to the valve on my 2006 CR 450 when the valves got so bad. Well, they're actually prone to wearing out really bad those years, and I'm going to show you that. Okay, here's a picture of that intake valve. Hopefully you guys can see what I'm talking about. The profile on the valve there is actually worn so bad it looks like it's stepped in, and it should just be a nice flat profile. And I'll draw that on the board so you can have a better idea. I'll show you that right now. So as I showed you in that picture, you could see the profile of the valve was gone, and I'm just going to draw it here just to re-clarify that. So you got your valve, and it comes down, and there should be a nice angle profile. Well, actually, there could be a couple different steps in the profile there. It's kind of something like that. How it's got, you know, its own specific profile to match the seat. Now what happened with my intake valves on my 450, they were particularly weak those years, and what happened to the profile on that, it actually got cupped in like that. And that right there was from wearing out really bad because of the problem they had with those valves those years. So what I ended up doing was having a shop recut the seat properly at a more durable valve profile. I don't know exactly how, they're the experts on that, but I installed some kibble weight stainless steel valves that are a lot more durable than the stock ones. So just a little heads up there. 2 reasons why you're doing this. You want to make sure that you've got valve clearance, and if you can't get it back, and the way you can check all this for if it's leaking or not, the best way to determine the overall condition of a 4-stroke motor is to do a leak down test on it. And what you do with that is you actually bring the piston up to top dead center and then charge the cylinder through the spark plug hole. It threads in there, the leak down detector, and there's gauges on it, and you charge all this with compressed air, and you read the gauges, and it'll give you a percentage of leakage either through your piston rings, so you would hear air coming out of the crankcase vent, or you'll be losing air through your intake or the exhaust. And you can really pinpoint where you're having the problem. If you're having power loss and you've got too much leak down on your motor, you're losing too much percentage of air, you can find out exactly if it's going through the crankcase by the sound it makes in the vent, or you can listen through the intake port or the exhaust and see where the leak's coming from. Now with my old Honda 450, it was leaking through the intake, obviously, because the intake valve was so badly worn, and that's kind of a little bit different setup than these more simpler rocker arm designs on my CR450 and a lot of the high performance 4-stroke motors. They use what is called a shim under bucket, where it's a lot more of a technical procedure to do a valve adjustment, because you actually replace the shims on top of the stem, and then the bucket sits over top of that, and the cam lobe actually rides directly on that bucket, directly pushing the valve open and close, rather than the rocker arm design on this little Kodiak here. So just a little bit more of a technical explanation there, just to kind of let you guys know what you're actually doing this for and what to look for when you've got some performance loss. What can happen is you'll lose a bit of performance, it'll be harder to start, it'll be backfiring, which this little quad's actually backfired a couple times on deacceleration, so which kind of led me to believing that the valves might be a little bit tight on it, and sure enough they are. So we're going to open up that gap, and I'm going to show you how to do that right now. Okay, I already got 3 feeler gauges set aside here. Now it's obviously time I gotta get a new set of them, so I'm actually going to leave a link in the description where you can get a set of feeler gauges. But these old ones here, I actually had to cut them down. Like I said, talking about checking the valve clearance on my CR450, I needed a thin little strip there, so I had to cut them so I could actually get that in underneath the in between the top of the bucket and the cam lobe. These ones are, I can still use them. I got 3 different ones. One is 0.064, the other one is 0.076, and the other one is 0.1. I'm going to go with the thickest setting. That's what you want, because as you run the motor, these are going to close up again. So, and obviously if you've never ever checked this, super strongly recommend you do this. Not only that, once you get it set, you should do a leak down test on it to check the overall condition of the engine. But anyways, what you need to set this clearance is just a 10mm wrench to start with. So I can barely even get the thinnest shim in there right now, which is 0.06, which is the tightest clearance it's supposed to have, and that's barely fitting in there. So I'm going to open up this by just backing this off. So I got the adjuster backed off and the feeler gauge in there, the biggest feeler gauge, the 0.1mm gauge. Just going to tighten the adjuster onto the feeler gauge just a little bit, so you feel just a little bit of resistance. And then what you want to do is tighten down the nut without turning the little adjuster. So just be careful about doing that. I'm just going to leave the feeler gauge in there. Tighten it down. There is a tool you can buy to do this too, but I'm just going to try and wing it with what I have. So I got that tightened down, and there's just a bit of resistance as I pull the feeler gauge in and out of there, so I know I have the intake valve clearance set, and you can actually hear it now when you wiggle it up and down. That's what you want to look for. You don't want it solid. If it's solid, bad. A little tappy, good. So the tap you hear is the clearance between the little adjuster and the top of the valve stem. So that's pretty much it for setting the intake valve. The exhaust valve is the exact same way, except there's a little bit different specifications for it. They are actually, they're actually set a little bit thicker. So the clearance for the exhaust is 0.16 to 0.2 millimeters. So exact same way you check that with it at top dead center after the intake strokes. When you're rolling the motor around to get this set, you want to watch for the intake valve to go into the cylinder as you're turning it and then come back up, and then you want to keep turning it until you see the top dead center mark on the flywheel there. So just make sure you do that and you should be good to go. A little tappy sound on the tappet, so we're good there. I just got to check the exhaust. Same thing, I'll clean up the cover the exact same way, and we'll check these little O-rings. There is no obvious signs of any oil leaking there. Pretty shocking to see that there is that much valve wear on it already, but like I said, I don't think this has ever been done since it was purchased, and it's got 5,000 kilometers on it. It did let out a couple of backfires after running it on high speed for as fast as this little 450 will go down some dirt roads, and deaccelerating and slowing down for a stop sign let out a couple pops. And it'll be interesting to see how it runs now that I've got the valve clearance set correctly, and I'm going to go ahead and do the exhaust now too. Okay guys, so after looking around, I thought I'd show you guys how to do the exhaust valve. It's going to be a lot trickier to get at, but I think what I'm going to do is remove the tire and the right front shock, and then that should allow me access to the valve cover, the exhaust valve cover back in there. But it's going to be a bit of a chore to get at. So we'll get the shock off and the wheel and see how much room we have in there to work. Okay guys, that's actually going to work out real good. You just need to take your front wheel off and the right front shock, and that'll expose all this open area. You can reach in there and get your exhaust valve clearance set. there you go, guys. Just another video there for you with some technical explanation of why you're doing this and why it's a good idea to keep an eye on this, and also that whole leak down test procedure. Like I said, that's like the best way to determine the condition of any four-stroke engine. And maybe one of these days I'll pick up one of those testers and show you guys how to do that on this or my 450 or whatever. But yeah, for four strokes, check the condition of the engine with a leak down tester. Two strokes, well, you just use the good old-fashioned compression tester. So yeah, once again, thanks for watching my video. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead, hit that subscribe button. Click on that link down in the description there if you need to get a set of feeler gauges. And catch you guys later. Biker Mike out.